Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette for the Holy Nicholean Catholic Church on Vestiges of Christianity for this December 28, 2016, the Feast of the Holy Innocents, coming to you live from the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. Today we're going to be starting a new series on Demonology. I am here with my co-host, Deacon Thomas Moreland. And today we're going to talk to you about the assessment process that is used for the parent ministry of our outreach, the Order of Exorcists, in determining the genuine cases of possession as opposed to what would be classifiable as mental illness. Are they related? Are they different? How do we decide which is which? And can there be harm done if the assessment is wrong and the wrong treatment plan is applied? This and more today on Vestiges of Christianity. Don't go away. Welcome back, everyone. Once again, this is Bishop Bryan Ouellette, and the subject today is demonology, particularly demonic possession assessment. And I hope you had a wonderful Christmas holiday. And to keep in mind that we are still very much within the Christmas season. Christmas season extends itself all the way to the Epiphany, which is January 6th, I believe. And so keep the feasting going, keep your Christmas trees up, keep your lights lit, because we are in a time of celebration. And I think sometimes the secular world tends to decide for us when the Christmas season's over, because, let's face it, corporate America has made its money and is no longer interested in the Christmas season from their vantage point, which is all about making money. After all, they want you to buy their expensive gifts. So let's not fall victim to that unfortunate aspect of our society today. Another thing to keep in mind, for those of you who might not have listened from last week, we are now part of a new network, on-air radio network, and that is our affiliate, in the sense that our shows, Vestiges of Christianity, are now going to be airing on that network, alongside with Spreaker. In fact, on-air radio has asked us, or even offered to us, I should say, to host the show entirely for free. So we might take them up on that offer. Although we do have a bit of a following here on Spreaker, and so I'm not sure I want to completely give up Spreaker just yet. But they would like us to do 1-hour shows versus the 45 minutes that Spreaker allows us. So if we stay on Spreaker, we'll have to go up to a more expensive plan. So it's even that much more important that you please, if you like this show, donate to us by going to Nicholean.org or esotericcatholic.org and clicking on the donation button and giving some money to the church for its hosting this program out of its own pocket. Remember, we are a 501c3, federally tax exempt. So if you want to deduct us from your taxes, please remember us as a potential charity. For we don't only do this work, which is our teaching ministry, we also do exorcism ministry, which is what we are going to be talking with you about today. So let's go ahead and start without any further delay. Deacon Thomas, I trust you had a good Christmas break as well.
I did. Thank you for having me.
Oh, it's always a pleasure to have you with us. I would like, as often as we can, to have you on, and I think we have finally resolved our sound issues that we had over the last two shows. It was just a minor setting that was wrong within the Skype integration, and so that's part of the reason why we were not able to hear Deacon Thomas as well before, but now you sound really clear, and it's actually quite wonderful to finally have that fixed. Additionally, if you have any questions for us, feel free to call into the show at 802-321-0073. That's 802-321-0073, and we'll bring you on the air. We don't screen calls, so please, if you do have a question or a comment, keep it civil, and we will do our best to answer whatever questions you have. All right, so let's start talking about this topic. So as I've mentioned in the show description for today's topic, the Holy Nicholean Catholic Church here in Atlanta, Georgia, receives about 4 to 6 cases on average a month. Now, when these cases come in to us, it's usually assumed by the party that's contacting us who is seeking help that there is demonic possession present in their lives in some form or fashion. So it's the job of the church to decide whether or not this is a genuine case or if it falls under the category of some other type of problem, most notably psychological, because in reality it would be very harmful and unethical for a person, for a church that works in deliverance or exorcism ministry to perform an exorcism on a person who is mentally ill, or I should say just mentally ill, because as we're going to see throughout the course of this discussion, mental illness and demonic possession sort of coexist alongside as part of the same problem, and that makes the assessment process very difficult, because if there is even the slightest case of a genuine demonic possession, and by demonic we are referring specifically to fallen angels in the Christian, or I should say the Judeo-Christian context, then it would not be inappropriate to include exorcism as part of that victim's treatment plan. However, if the issue does not involve anything directly demonic, or I should say a direct demonic attack, then exorcism would not be a healthy thing, because then you could actually be feeding into their delusion. And so, as most of you know, my background is in psychology. Prior to working in ministry at the level that I now am, in the capacity of a bishop, an exorcist bishop, no less. I worked in intake facilities. I've worked in primary prevention. My work was mostly clinical in the field of psychology, and so I had a unique perspective on these types of cases, because most of my caseload was made up by bipolar, schizophrenic, and schizoaffective disorders. And so we saw the gamut of psychosis, and in many cases, people that have a psychosis report the source of their problem as being demonic. Of course, from a clinical point of view, we can't treat it that way. We have to treat it from a medical standpoint, and so therefore psychiatry comes into play, medication, and therapy. But what about the genuine cases? What do we do when we encounter those genuine cases? And so that's where my shift in focus went towards ministry, because I was seeing a I wouldn't want to say an increase, but I would say I've seen a lot of cases where the problem was psychospiritual in nature, and perhaps they could have been greatly helped through the intervention of somebody in a spiritual capacity, of which a psychological clinic, is not going to be qualified to perform unless there happens to be a chaplain on staff, and even then they're usually not terribly experienced with dealing with the demonic. And Deacon Thomas Moreland also works in the field in his capacity, which he gets to see some cases. So I know, Thomas, what is it that you do for the sake of the audience, so that they can kind of get an idea of your background in the field as well, to be able to talk on this topic?
I work as a triage technician at a community mental health facility.
Okay, so you get to see a lot. You get to see everything then.
Yeah, we're the front lines of everything. So they come through us first, and then we triage them and determine what the best case scenario is for them, either inpatient or simply just referring them to outpatient services.
Right. So we both are in a position to, I think, talk somewhat intelligently about this topic, because there is a lot of confusion about it. And I think particularly in deliverance ministry, or where you're dealing with some of the more charismatic evangelical denominations, you're going to find that people will very quickly jump to the demonic conclusion, and not give much credence towards the psychological side of it. And this is, again, further compounded by the fact that demonic possession is usually just part of the problem. I can assure you, anybody who has been genuinely demonically possessed has psychological and emotional side effects. There are consequences to demonic possession that exist beyond the deliverance stage. And so, even though, when you read the scriptures, it seems like the apostles and Jesus just waved a magic wand and they were immediately fully cured from their demonic afflictions. The reality of it is that there is still lasting trauma, and in some cases the reason for this is because the people who are coming to us are not spiritually competent. Not all of them. In fact, sometimes I will end up meeting some very spiritually advanced individuals who have spiritual problems because of the nature of their natural advancement. And that's a different case altogether. It's a different type of resolution. But in many cases, perhaps more so than not, the people who do come to us that we find in our cases are not spiritually sophisticated. They haven't been receiving the sacraments of the church. Some of them have never even been baptized. And these are risk factors. There are spiritual risk factors that come with not cultivating your spiritual life. They're not praying regularly. And sometimes people will come to me, and being a bishop and being a minister and being a pastoral counselor, I get to hear a lot of things from people, and they will often ask me, why is their life so difficult, and why are all these? It feels like the devil's always assaulting them. They're depressed. They're unhappy. They're not content. And I'll immediately ask them, well, how many hours a day are you spending in prayer? And and they immediately get that look on their face, like, hours, as if to say, I didn't realize that I was that spending more than an hour in prayer was necessary. They're usually just doing a few minutes. Maybe they get up in the morning and they kneel down at their bed and they might say a few morning prayers that last in all but 2 or 3 minutes, and maybe they do so again before they go to bed. And maybe the real astute ones will say a couple prayers throughout the day. But if you summed it all up, they're probably still operating at less than 10 minutes a day in prayer. That is not sufficient. every Christian should be spending no less than a couple hours a day in prayer. It is absolutely essential to the health of the person spiritually. And I can assure you that most people do not come even close to that. And so, because they're not, the risk for spiritual disease is great. And in this case, we would call it a demonic attack. But it's not always the kind of attack that would be an assault, an intentional assault on a victim, sort of like a predatory attack. That's different than an ordinary demonic attack, and perhaps we need to make that distinction here before we move on, Deacon, because I think sometimes people don't really understand the difference. When we're talking about things that would reach the level of a demonic oppression, a demonic obsession, or ultimately a demonic possession, you are now, particularly in demonic possession, you are dealing with an intelligent, direct assault, intentional assault from a fallen angel on a human being. That's very different than the result of living in a fallen world where we are subjected to disease, death, entropy, decay, misfortune, negativity, all that come about through the process of ordinary temptation, which is also a demonic attack. Temptation is a demonic attack, but we're all victim to it at some point or another, sometimes several times throughout the day. If you get that instinct to lie about something because you are trying to hide a truth and don't want to deal with the consequences of being found out, that's a demonic temptation. It doesn't come close to possession, but it's no less an involvement with the demonic that can open you up to greater levels of intensity if you do not have the grace of the church to protect you, which comes through prayer, comes through the sacraments, particularly baptism and Eucharist and reconciliation. Those three sacraments are instrumental to ridding yourself of demonic influence in your life. I would say perhaps none are more important than reconciliation in this regard. Because baptism, while it can intrinsically be the most important, because that's what opens us up to salvation. In the Catholic context, it includes an exorcism that comes with baptism, so it's definitely a ridding of demonic influence in a person's life before they receive it. The problem is it's one time only. Multiple baptisms are not acceptable. By the theology of the Nicene Creed, we are prohibited from performing multiple baptisms. So, in a sense, the reconciliation, going to confession, has more impact on our protection against demonic assault throughout the rest of our lives, because what it essentially is doing is continuing on the grace of baptism so that we can experience the grace of baptism continuously. So every now and then I'll sometimes get someone that says, I was baptized when I was a child, but I want to be rebaptized again because I feel like the devil's coming after me, and I need, I want to be baptized so I can get rid of this. And it's like, well, no, you've already received baptism. So, what can I do? Well, come to confession, because then the grace of baptism is reactivated, and every sin that you've committed since your baptism is removed, thus making you less of a target to the assaults of the evil one. And so this is a little bit of a tangent, but it's important to understand in the overall context. So, Deacon, let's talk about our own caseloads without giving out any, personal information about our clients or discussing anything that would reveal anything about them, as we value the confidentiality very strictly, and so anybody that comes to us, we don't ever share the details of their information with anybody outside of our team. However, there are some good case studies that we have worked with in the past that show up. And I know that you see the intake forms. You're part of our team, even though you live in Oklahoma. You're part of our team, and you're privy to all of the information that the rest of the team here in Atlanta is privy to. And you get to see the intake forms. You get to see what people are reporting. And often, working in psychology as you do, and myself having worked in psychology for many years prior to coming into ministry, you see these cases and you're kind of like, this sounds like this person's not taking their meds, or they've decompensated because they were on their medication and then they decided, I'm going to come off of it. So, what is your initial impression when you see these intake forms and you'll hear somebody saying that they're seeing demons everywhere, or they're seeing matrixing and taking pictures of tree formations and various other things that we encounter on a fairly regular basis when we get information from a caseload. What's your initial impression coming from the vantage point of psychology when you see these intake forms?
And for me, it all starts with, obviously reading them and seeing what their major complaint is. Sometimes you can just simply mark it off as something, a simple haunting, of a house, which definitely doesn't fall within the realms of demonic possession or anything. That's a small percentage, and we have the ones that are exhibiting, and in the intake form, they admit to having a form of mental illness. Sometimes they even go as far as to say that they haven't been taking their medication. Well, then you can almost always chalk that up to, well, they need to get back on their medication. If it doesn't relieve the symptoms, then maybe there is, something to their claim. Then you have the ones that are more legitimate, no history of mental illness in the family, never been diagnosed with anything, but yet, they are exhibiting possible forms of mental illness, but it can, the demonic often masks itself within the realms of mental illness. It operates, the demonic operates within the tangible world, so of course it's going to operate within tangible realities such as mental illness, sickness, and things like that. Very seldom will you ever come across, I think me and you were talking about this other day, the stereotypical, possession of somebody floating through the air and, spitting up pea soup and spitting and talking Latin and things like that. Normally a demonic will work within the realms of genuine sickness and mental illness and things like that. So what I look for is there a history of mental illness in the family? Is there a history of mental illness with the person? If there is, are they taking their medication? That's what I normally look for.
You brought up some very good points there, two in particular. The first being, how we would, whether or not they're getting better with medication. That's, I think, one of the things that we would look for in our assessment processes. If they're off their meds, if they have a psychiatric diagnosis, and we always ask, and if they have been to a counselor, we request their medical records so that we can further explore what the diagnosis was and kind of get an idea of their functioning. And then we try to decide, well, have they been compliant? Hopefully we can sometimes even talk to their medical team to get an idea as to, how compliant they have been. But sometimes it's only the client themselves who knows this. And so this gives us an idea, because one of the things that we do look for as a team of an assessment team for determining the validity of a case involving demonic possession or any kind of a demonic attack is if the client improves with medical intervention, then typically the cause is predominantly medical in nature. If, however, they have been very compliant, and the more medical attention they receive, the sicker they get, yet when they come to us and they receive intervention of prayer, sacraments, sacramentals, and various other tools of our trade that we can apply to these victims, and they improve, then that's a good sign that there is something more spiritual going on and less medical. Remember, they always coexist. And that's important to keep in mind throughout the entire assessment process, is that there are always going to be, in every case of genuine demonic involvement, there are always going to be psychological and emotional deficits every single time. And so what we're trying to determine is not whether or not the problem is purely psychological, as much as what we're trying to determine is how much of a direct assault from the demonic realm is occurring here with this particular individual client. And that's where we begin. So one of the things that I should perhaps mention is some of the things we do in the assessment process, because this seems to be of interest to people. I've been on a few other talk shows over the years, even over the past few months, and one of the questions that seems to come up often is how do you determine this? So one of the things that we do is what I call is a prayer test. Okay, so the first thing is prayer test. That is where we will draw from some lengthy prayer from the liturgy of the church, usually Psalms or something related that would be lengthy to carry out. So we dim the lights, we light a blessed candle, we sprinkle holy water. That's actually a second test. Do they react to holy water? Do they react to the presence of the cross? Do they react to any blessings that take place in the environment? You're always looking at the client when you come in for that first assessment. You try a few of these things to see what creates a reaction, if any. Then we start the prayers. And so we want the prayers to last more than 10 minutes because, generally speaking, all genuine demonic entities can resist at least 10 minutes of prayer. So you want to go out, but usually within 10 minutes a reaction will start to manifest in weaker, in most demons except the strongest. There are some extremely powerful demonic forces that can even withstand 10 minutes of continuous prayer, but the majority of them cannot. And so that can sometimes give us a reaction. If we start to see the client breaking down during the prayer, then we know. We also want to have the client pray. Can they go through the Our Father without struggling through the words? That's also a good telltale sign. The Rosary, the Hail Marys, these are the prayers of the Church that are very powerful against demonic presence. In fact, I tell people all the time, if at any point you feel the presence of a demonic entity within your life, immediately appeal to the Our Father and the Hail Mary. Immediately run to those prayers and continuously say them until you feel the presence gone, which usually might mean 10 minutes of prayer, which is why knowing how to use the Rosary, which can often take much longer than 10 minutes to get through, is a wonderful solution to ordinary demonic problems that all Christians are faced with. So those are two. Another thing is what is known and coined by by Kenneth Deal in the Catholic Demonologist's Handbook as the church test. And this is a little bit more risky, but you can invite them to sit through Mass and see if they can make it through the whole Mass, if there's any struggle or any conflict there, particularly if they are predisposed to receive the Eucharist, if they can receive it, although there's some inherent risk there because you never want to expose the Eucharist to any type of defilement or sacrilege, which can happen with demonic possession. So you have to be relatively careful with that type of test. But can they sit through the Mass? And so often we will invite our clients to come to our private masses that are held in my private chapel, and then my team will be present there to assist if there's any reaction. But generally speaking, I don't go to that length if I already suspect that demonic possession or some type of demonic involvement, serious demonic involvement, is already active within their lives, because then it's just going to create more of a problem for us that would be best solved in a different way. But yeah, it is another way that we can utilize the tools of the church in order to try to assess how the client reacts. Another thing that we do is bless the client and anoint them with an exorcised oil. It's a special oil that is consecrated for the particular purpose of exorcism, and that is used to bless a client, see if there's any reaction to that. And if there's no reaction to any of this, then we will sometimes run right into the sacrament of the sick, at which time they would receive the Eucharist. And that's only when we can safely determine that there's no possession or any type of serious oppression where they can react very violently to the presence of these things, or being in the presence of these things. So we will often touch the crucifix to their foreheads to give, physical contact with a blessed or sacred object and see if there's a reaction to that. The Litany of the Saints is another one that we employ. Very helpful, very useful, and because it's long and it's chanted, and these things can have greater impact on a genuinely possessed individual. So if any of these things cause a negative reaction in the client, that is sometimes a good evidence, but not exclusively. And Deacon, you actually brought up an interesting discussion that we had with the team regarding a particular case that we're working on right now, where it's looking like classic possession. In fact, reading the intake form, it sounds almost as though it is a textbook right out of the movies case of demonic possession. It seems like every element is there, and we haven't investigated the case yet, but we're in the process of getting ready. We're still in pre-assessment with that particular case. And you brought up an interesting question that involved whether or not the person is still malingering. So even if we went through these several stages of testing, and if the person reacted to them in a way that would be consistent with demonic possession, how would we then how would we rule out that the person's not malingering? Maybe because they are mentally ill and they think themselves to be possessed when they're not, and they're just carrying out the motions of what they expect a possession to look like for the sake of the expectation of everybody else. And maybe it's an intention behavior, who knows? But you brought up, how would we go about ruling that out? And it's a good question, because malingering does happen in these cases. It can happen. But what we have to also consider is looking at acts of sacrilege. And in this particular case, one of the things that was revealed to us in the intake form was that this particular victim, or I should say alleged victim, will do things to religious objects that are to destroy them or defile them in some way. And while that can be still an act of malingering and not necessarily a demonic possession, one could still argue that any kind of religious defilement or act of sacrilege has its origin in something demonic, which at the very least would involve some type of spiritual solution. So these are the criteria that we look for, and we are looking to see what draws the reaction. So it's actually quite simple in the sense that if the person responds well to medication, then stick with medication. If the person responds well to spiritual intervention, start at the minimum that's required and work your way up And only when you get to a point where medication and therapy, traditional therapy, is not working, and all of the other interventions of the church have not helped, only then would you jump into consideration of a full solemn exorcism. So, Deacon, any thoughts on that, for the sake of maybe clarifying for any confusion with the audience?
Well, I think you made a good point there with the you start with the least amount of action needed, and you work your way up to the most, which would be a solemn exorcism. I've seen people, unfortunately, within the independent sacramental movement, their first action and their only action is a solemn exorcism for everything. Oh, you live in a house and sometimes the door slams by itself. Well, we're going to do a solemn exorcism. You don't. That's not always necessary, and very seldom it will ever be necessary. Sometimes a simple house blessing or blessing of a client will be more than sufficient. And I think, we go about it the right way. We start off even determining whether it may or may not be demonic in nature. Then from there, we will ascertain what is the best route to go about. Sometimes it's just spiritual counseling. That's the only thing that they need. Sometimes they just need a little more prayer in their life, or reception of the sacraments. Sometimes there's just small things like that. That's all that's needed. And I think that, even though we are an exorcism ministry, primarily we're a spiritual ministry. Not everything's an exorcism. And, I think that that's a good thing to stress, is that not everything's a personal demonic attack. Sometimes it's a general demonic attack that everybody suffers from, but yet we can still help with.
Absolutely. That's a very good point, and I think something that we see too often in deliverance ministry in particular, where the abuses occur. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette. We'll be right back after a short word from On Air Radio. Stay tuned. Don't go away.
Hey folks, this is Joe Roos. Did you know that you can help support the On Air Radio Network each time you make a purchase on Amazon.com? Just click the Amazon banner ad on our website, onairradionetwork.com, and the On Air Radio Network will receive a percentage of the price of your purchase. It doesn't cost you a thing, and it won't affect your shopping. Thanks for your support.
Yes, remember everyone, that's onairradionetwork.com. Our show airs on that channel Tuesdays and Wednesdays and on Sunday. 1 p.m. I believe it is. I will check to make sure. I know it's on Tuesday and Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern Time, but it also airs on Sunday. I have to confirm when that will be. I'll check the schedule again on that. And we're almost out of time here. But please check us out on onairradionetwork.com. And if you can afford to support both the network and the show, we'd appreciate it. We really need your support. Not cheap to run these podcasts. Deacon, any last thoughts before we close up here? We got a couple minutes.
No, nothing I can really think of. It was a pretty good show. You covered a lot of good stuff. Just that not everything is always what it appears to be, at first gander. So, if you live within the Atlanta area and you're having problems, feel free to reach out and contact with Bishop Bryan, and then the group will be more than happy to help out.
Absolutely, and one of the things that we didn't have time to get to that we will on successive episodes of this Demonology series is that there are all sorts of different types of spiritual problems. The least of which is caused by an actual fallen angel of the satanic variety. There's different types of demons, and if for those of you who have listened to some of the other shows that I have done, either here on Vestiges of Christianity or even on the other shows that I've been a guest on, you've heard me talk about the different types of demons and how they have different solutions. And in many cases, what people think is a demon is actually really just a standard classic haunting that does not even involve a fallen angel. I kind of disagree with Kenneth Deal's demonologist book, where he sort of like jumps to the demonic conclusion regardless. In fact, he even says that there's no harm that can be done by assuming the worst. But yeah, there is actually a lot of harm that can be done, because the solutions are very different. And wrathful spirits and fallen angels can almost behave, from our vantage point, the same way. And so we need to be mindful of that. So perhaps next time on this series we will talk about the different types of demons and the different types of solutions that come up, maybe even next week. I'm sure if Deacon Thomas is available, we will definitely see you next week. Will that be possible there, Deacon?
I will be here next week, most definitely.
Awesome. Okay, well, we're at the end of the show, unfortunately, but I wanted to also make mention that I will be on Within the Chaos on January 12th at 10 p.m. Eastern to 12 a.m. Eastern Time. That's January 12th, 10 p.m. to 12 a.m. Eastern Time. It's sort of a part 2. I was on Within the Chaos, I think it was back in October, if I'm not mistaken, maybe November. But it is going to be an interesting discussion. And so don't miss it. Mark your calendars, January 12th, 2017, on Within the Chaos, hosted by Rodney Shortridge. Wonderful show, and I'm looking forward to it. And also check us out on Facebook. Look up Holy Nicholean Catholic Church on Facebook, or Order of Exorcists, Atlanta Division, New York Division. New York Division's not functional, not active, but there is a page for it, and the page is active. So we hope to see you there. Feel free to ask questions, and like Deacon Thomas said, if you do have a spiritual problem and live in the Atlanta, Georgia area within about a 2-hour driving radius around the city, my team can help. And all of our services are completely free of charge. We do ask that you please donate to help support the ministry, for the ministry operates exclusively on donations. But we would never turn down anyone if they can't afford to support the ministry with a donation. We'll come anyway and help. This is Bishop Bryan Ouellette and Deacon Thomas Moreland for Vestiges of Christianity. Until next week, take care, everyone. Goodbye.